Primal Piggy here with another BDSM United podcast. What level of intensity is your power exchange? And how does your dynamic deal with change? Because the more they learn and grow, people often change. The more we learn and grow, we often are on a journey of change. Here is something that describes both different intensity levels of power exchange and how each person deals with change. So let's see what level of intensity your power exchange is. First is only in scene. The couple is generally egalitarian and only occasionally play at a power dynamic during kinky scenes. They negotiate as equals outside of a scene about sexual contact with others. Typically, this is role playing. Typically, you're not really in a power exchange relationship. You're in a top and bottom scene, or you have top and bottom scenes where you role play uh, master slave or dom and sub. Nothing wrong with this. That's just what it is. When you're only in the scene, it's typically not, your relationship typically isn't based on power exchange. Uh, it's just you do that within the bedroom or within scenes. Part of my time is owned, is the second part. The submissive type is part time, and the dominant only has authority over limited and specific parts of their life. And monogamy or polyamory is not one of them, typically. They must negotiate as equals in this area. So, this is a typical uh, DS or DDLG type of dynamic here, where the submissive type is part time. In other words, they're in a dynamic uh, when they're together, but they're not necessarily acting in their identity when they're apart. And the dominant only has authority over limited or specific parts of their life. It's not a total power exchange. So this is how the bulk of, I would say, BDSM works. Sometimes, though, it would be the this next type, which I would call all the time, but not everything. In this scenario, the submissive type is full time, but the dominant still only has authority over limited and specific parts of their life. And again, monogamy or polyamory is not usually one of them, and they must negotiate as equals in that area. In other words, if someone wants to have more than one relationship, typically this isn't the you know typically people have autonomy over their relationships and in the scope of how many relationships or having different types of relationships. A dominant wouldn't be dominant over that other relationship that the person was in. And typically speaking, they may have the dominant may not be dominant over like their children or their family life or their extended relatives uh, or that sort of thing, or maybe their work or their career. The dominant may be able to give input or suggestions or advice, but typically would not make decisions in that area. This is probably the bulk here, where people are consistently within their identities, where they're always the separating factor here between the last and this one. And sometimes people in their careers and in their everyday life, they don't present as they're submissive, but they don't present as submissive in those areas. They present um, uh, more in charge, more empowered, and in charge. And so that's really kind of the scope of the bulk there. The next type I would say is this: my sex life is owned. The S type or submissive type has given over authority in almost all areas of their life, including relationships such as polyamory, but the dominant has promised them specific sexual expectations, such as monogamy or that they will have certain rights should polyamory occur. For this instance, remaining the primary partner or helping to select new partners. And it's agreed that the submissive type has the right to walk out should the dominant break their word. This is this is definitely more of a niche within our culture, that typically when people are giving ownership or authority exchange, there's typically not a bunch of limits. Uh, but for some, this may work. It may be that the dominant, is a more primary partner, and may give them autonomy over certain relationships that they have their um, outside of their relationship. Typically, though, an MS relationship looks like this: everything is owned. There's no recourse. A slave is owned property, sorry, and willingly gives up their right to decide on such issues or enforce such limits. They must depend on the dominant's honor and the promises that they have made. And if those promises are changed, they really have no recourse. And so that's typically an MS, and they don't come to that relationship typically right away. They typically experiment with different levels of power exchange with the person first, in a long time of consideration, long time of training. That's typically where the submissive partner is learning um, about the master and uh, learning the master, in other words, and or the potential master. And so there typically comes with a high buy-in. In other words, it's a long-term investment. So my advice, though, is to future-proof your contracts and your agreements by revisiting them at regular intervals. Though there will always be things on the distant horizon that you can't plan for because they may not even exist yet. That way you can process change effectively. And something to consider is like someone in the 80s who came up with a BDSM contract for their relationship wouldn't have anything within that contract or anything within the scope of their relationship on how to handle being online or internet um, etiquette or internet behavior. The reason is because in the 80s, largely speaking, the internet didn't exist. It wasn't on very many people's radar. The concept of internet or online wasn't really a thing. And so at some point they had to add that to their relationship. And so and possibly add that to contracts or agreements that they had made, or just evolve together over time. But it's definitely, the issues will come up that that we can't plan for, that we have to address. And so there will be things that don't exist yet that if you enter into a relationship that will come up down the road. The best thing you can do is sit down and talk about them, and come up with a plan together with when new technologies or new philosophies or just new laws or new regulations or new anything. When the new whatever it is comes up into your life, it's best um, to make a plan for it, to set goals for it, to address it, to come up with rules for it, or come up with how or expectations of behavior for both the dominant and the submissive type in the relationship. So those are just a few different ways we tried to kind of group them together, but power exchange involves people. It can be messy. It can because people are messy, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. Messy's good. I mean, because messy involves emotions and it involves feelings and thoughts and beliefs and in behaviors and all kinds of things. When humans are involved, humans are just complicated, and we're not simple creatures. And so, as we uh, come together and exchange power in one way or another, whether limited or total, we definitely you can see that there are a variety of ways to do a power exchange relationship, and one each relationship is specific to the people, the messy people that are involved, the messy complicated people that are involved. And so um, learning to deal with change and learning to make room for change is definitely something to consider when you're exchanging power and forming relationships. Just on a side note or an ending note is that age and health and just what our bodies are capable of doing given our age and the types of health concerns and mobility concerns and possible disability concerns and things like that, abilities and disabilities, um, all of those kinds of things will change, are inevitable changes because as humans we are aging and our bodies change from birth, puberty, and then on beyond um, into adulthood, senior adulthood, and just as we begin to approach the end of our life, there's even changes for then. So change is inevitable, and how we process change should be done effectively. I'm Primal Piggy. Thank you for joining me for this BDSM United podcast. Uh, you can find all of our resources at www.bdsmunited.com. It was a joy speaking with you today, and I'll talk with you again soon.